We have very few evidence-based treatments for borderline personality disorder at this point. DBT is probably the treatment for which there is the greatest evidence.
Dialectical behavior therapy was designed very specifically for people who self-harmed and had strong suicidal impulses.
It basically is helping you to deal with situations that are going to come up every day, and your emotional reaction is going to be a certain way, and it helps you deal with that emotional reaction. It helps you find ways to stabilize yourself.
It is the synthesis or merging of trying to change something while simultaneously radically accepting that it is what it is.
It encourages, first of all, the person who's suffering to step out and look at their own emotions as a third person might, rather than to immediately act on them.
The reason it's called dialectical behavior therapy is because the treatment itself is the synthesis of both the change in behavior therapy and the acceptance, which, when the treatment was developed, was drawn primarily from my own practice and experience in Zen.
It used to feel literally like people's eyes would have a physical effect on my body. Like my neck would prickle and my heart would constrict. And I interpret that they are looking at me in a hostile way. You know, the fact is, they are looking at me. But I can't assume what they're feeling inside and what they're thinking. DBT has helped me tolerate that I feel this thing and I interpret it this way, but it may not necessarily be the reality.
I like dialectical behavioral therapy because there were things that I could work on a daily basis that would help me get through the day, and there were certain exercises that I could do, and there was concrete things that I could do.
The last time I desperately wanted to cut myself, I did a type of technique that I learned through DBT, which is I went and I held ice cubes in my hand. And putting ice cubes in your hand when you really want to experience physical pain is a way of focusing on something without necessarily hurting yourself. Instead of saying, oh, I just shouldn't feel this way, or oh, I need to change the way I feel, you learn how to work with what you're experiencing in an more effective way.
It is so effective that we've had some clients, when they knew they were going to have to discuss something extremely intense like sexual abuse or rape or something like that, actually go to the store and buy those little cubes that you can put in your freezer, the ones that are wrapped up, and you can put them in your freezer. And when they have to have a session like that, they take them with them to the therapist's office, hold them in their hands during the session.
So my name's Tessa Nelson, and I do my practicum at a mental health agency in Preston, Idaho.
Hi, I'm Courtney Sims, and I'm doing my practicum at Shepherd's Pantry in California.
All right, and so one of my roles that I do is I do rehabilitation services with kids in the school specifically, and that's the main role that I do in addition to some counseling.
And I work at a food pantry, so we work with making sure that we can try to prevent homelessness and giving our clients the needs they have to have in order to keep their homes.
All right, and this is the general outline.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, and how it relates to borderline personality disorder. You'll see in our case study that we're going to be focusing on a teenager, but this can be used for any age, as long as they, understand and are willing to put in the work. So we'll be giving you a brief history of what BPD, which is the borderline personality disorder, what that is, and kind of different signs in order to spot that in your client, as well as explaining a history on where DBT came from and why it is such a big tool for working with clients in this field. and some key concepts to just remember while you go into session with your client. And then we're going to be showing you a Dear Man model. So this is one of many tools that DBT offers, but we think that it's one of the ones that you can use at the beginning, so that it gets the client ready to put in all that work. And some of them can be a little bit harder to deal with. Some of them take a lot out of you emotionally. And so Dear Man is one of the ones that can help when you are first getting started. And then we will conclude with just a little wrap up of everything that we've gone over and how it relates to hopefully the clients that you're able to serve. So a little bit about our case. Jerry Newman has been asked to see a high school counselor, which will be me and Tessa, because of some behavioral problems that his teachers were noticing during school. So the school contacted the parents and they decided to have him see us due to some mood swings and attachment challenges that we believe has to do with self-esteem issues and impulsive behaviors. He's made a few suicidal threats and has had some disassociation. So with all of these signs and all of these things that the teachers have spotted, including what the parents have also, shown us, we believe that DBT is a great tool that we'll be able to use in order to help Jerry kind of process through his emotions and really get to a better way of dealing with things and getting that self-esteem back and all of those different areas. So a little bit about the approach and the theory. There are common symptoms of borderline personality disorder. So we're looking at the micro level. So we're going to be dealing with Jerry. DBT can also be used in a group setting to deal with people maybe that have come together that have already have been given a diagnosis of BPD. And so we're looking micro though. And since Jerry is a teenager, we're going to be working with him after school to utilize the DBT approaches and just go over different tools and emotional regulations that he can do so that he not only can get an understanding of what's processing through his own mind, but then the best way to verbalize that process and those emotions so that it doesn't come out in a negative or way for him. So that's why we think that DBT is going to be the best approach for Jerry.
All right. And so going over what is borderline personality disorder, it is, and this is also compared to bipolar disorder because sometimes they do get confused. So borderline personality disorder is a mental illness that's marked by severe emotional dysregulation. And that's one of the main concepts when we look at BPD. There are mood swings that last from hours to days, depression, impulsivity, and an unstable personal relationships with others are very common. A lot of it can stem from early trauma, but it doesn't have to. And just like how your brain is wired, and some genetic predispositions are also associated with BPD. And it's treated through therapy and sometimes a combination with medication as well. Whereas bipolar disorder is specifically a mood disorder, and it's characterized by depressive and manic states. So people usually swing from being depressed into mania and vice versa. Mania causes excitement, psychosis, and an elevated sense of confidence. Depressive episodes can cause depression and feelings of guilt and fatigue. Genetics are a big component in bipolar disorder, and their chemical imbalances that are in your brain. And treatment options are also psychotherapy and medication. And so you can see the difference between BPD, where it's more characterized and constant with the states of dysregulation, or bipolar disorder is more of like periodic elevated moods and switching between mania and depression. And so this over here, borderline personality disorder, where it just talks about that one. It talks about the fear of abandonment, unstable and intense relationships is common with people who have BPD. People with BPD usually have a low self-esteem and sense of self. They have rapid mood changes. They do impulsive behavior. And there's self-harm involved as well as suicidal behavior. They have persistent feelings of emptiness, anger management, and paranoid thoughts as well. And so I've personally had some family members who've had BPD, and it really feels like a cycle where with the unstable relationships, with their fear of abandonment, it almost proves their abandonment fear, because they a lot of times these individuals will lash out at family members and stuff to try and get their needs met in unhealthy coping ways, which then pushes people away and causes the fear of abandonment. So it's kind of, they're stuck in a cycle. And so it's a very, very hard disorder to live with, especially when you're trying to get social needs met, which a lot of us do and need as well. And so here's a history of DBT. So it was originally developed by Marsha Linehan in the 70s. She's a suicide researcher specifically, and she dedicated her life to helping people who struggle with mental illness. And a lot of her motivations with helping these individuals came from her own experience, because she struggled with severe mental illness and suicidal ideation herself. She had debilitating depression, self-harm tendencies, and routine suicidal thoughts. And a lot of people stereotyped and misunderstood her, and she experienced severe abuse in the mental health industry at the time. There was mistreatment. She was stereotyped a lot. And in a lot of these situations, it only enhanced her troubles, and it didn't help them at all. And so when we look at like how DBT was made, by Lineman, she was motivated by her experience and her faith. She took concepts from Christianity and Buddhism, especially with mindfulness, and then she took and based them in behavioral theories as she learned about these concepts more extensively, and how she helped manage herself. She tried to also help others as well. And so at first, when she was creating her theory, there were a lot of troubles. She originally used more of a medical model based in behaviorism as we understood it back in the 70s and 80s, and it more focused with complete problem solving. And as she proceeded to test her theory with people and on people, a lot of them reacted negatively. They lashed out at her or the therapist who was doing it. They felt like they were being blamed for their problems and that everything was too rigid. There was not that validative approach that we learn about in our classes. And so it was really unhelpful in general. But then at the same time, when she decided to switch her theory when it wasn't working to more of a humanistic approach, which was becoming a very popular method when she was making her theory, she tried to approach everything with 100% validation and support, but it turned more into toxic positivity. And it didn't address her clients' needs. It didn't address their goals or their problems. And it resulted in a lot of complaints in therapy and like, why isn't this helping me? I'm tired of talking about this. And so the Zen approach came specifically from Buddhism, but she realized that she needed to combine validation, behaviorism, and emotional regulation to assist those with BPD achieve their goals and create a life worth living, which is essentially the main goal of BPD, is to create a life worth living for the client who's experiencing it. And so she began to investigate her own research in spiritual practices. And Leinen used meditative concepts to inform her practice, specifically from Buddhism, more so. And she limited down some of the more religious aspects of it and used practices that help build on mental health. And she began to incorporate biosocial theories with some Zen concepts to help her clients achieve a more regulated emotional state and to help reduce that dysregulation. And this was eventually termed as mindfulness by Leinen herself. And in my research, I'd also discovered that Buddhist practices were kind of seen as weird and funky back in the 70s and 80s. And so this was the first mental health approach that adopted those practices. And one of the reasons why she ended up calling it mindfulness and stuff like that instead of meditation was to help it be more socially acceptable in the time period. And so there are 4 modules of BPD, but there are 2 sections. And so this is the acceptance section. Mindfulness talks more about being non-judgmental and aware of the present moment, including your thoughts and emotions. And so this is kind of more where it focuses on the meditative state of things, where you're supposed to be aware of how you're feeling and your emotions, but not stack up more emotions upon yourself, and to just kind of neutrally accept them as they come and go. Distress tolerance was learning how to tolerate emotions in a crisis situation without making things worse. And for people with BPD, a crisis situation could look a lot differently than what we would call a crisis situation in our lives. A crisis situation could simply be somebody not responding quickly to a text message that would put them into a mental health crisis mode. And it's learning how to regulate those emotions that come up when they're in crisis and learn how to manage their behaviors as well. And learning how to manage behaviors comes more in the second section. But right now, let's go over mindfulness. So mindfulness is, as Leinen described it, as observing, describing, and participating in the moment, as well as doing it non-judgmentally, doing one thing at a time, and doing what works for you. And so it's about being aware of yourself, your thoughts, and your feelings, and creating that self-awareness is like step 1 in BPD. Because without creating that awareness, then the other steps don't really work and work together like they need to help people who have this mental illness. And so one of the key concepts in radical acceptance or in distress tolerance is radical acceptance. And the early concepts actually stemmed all the way back to post-World War II by Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish psychiatrist who survived a Nazi concentration camp, and he taught that cognitive acceptance of facts in the present were essential for survival. And you can read more about this concept in Man's Search for Meaning, which is what his book is called. Leinen further developed this concept by applying more Buddhist philosophies. Buddhist philosophy kind of roots in that suffering comes from attachment to pain and not the pain itself. So accepting reality for what it is and not dwelling in afflictions and creating more pain for yourself. So we're not talking about avoidance of feelings, but rather to accept feelings and facts without getting entangled further into emotional reactions with the onset of the initial feeling. And so you can kind of see in our demographic here, it talks about it's raining. Yep, we're just accepting it, but then we have it's raining on the other side. I don't like rain. I wish it wasn't raining. My day would be better if it wasn't raining. My day is ruined. Every day is like this. Why does it always rain when all I want for it is to be sunny? And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when it comes to BPD, is stacking up intense emotions upon yourself and creating more reactions, because how we think about our emotions creates the reaction to our emotions. And so this is the change section, which it talks about emotional regulation next, which is changing unwanted emotions, reducing vulnerability to emotions. And so there are specific ways on how to do emotional regulation and specific worksheets that we do that is done in BPD to help people understand their initial reaction and then accepting a more logical explanation of something. So if somebody walks around believing everyone is out to get them, like as their underlying thought process, and then there's something that comes in, or a kid kicks a ball and it hits them, they could be like, oh, that kid was out to get me, and when they kicked that ball, it hit me. But if you have changing your unwanted emotion, if you have the emotion to be more neutral and where you don't believe the world is out to get you, if a kid kicks a ball and it hits you, you could just assume, oh, they accidentally hit me. And so it's going and switching that cognitive process. Interpersonal effectiveness is more about improving and maintaining relationships and self-respect. So it's like building on self-esteem and learning how to communicate more effectively with people to get your needs met. And so here's when it talks about emotional regulation. Many people with BPD set out to change their emotions to be less distressing. Difficult emotions influence sometimes unwanted reactions. So dialectical behavioral therapy sets out to use mindfulness to help people with BPD reflect on their emotions and challenge their thoughts about their feelings before reacting to them. Behaviorism can then be used to help teach the client how to positively reinforce themselves and their mindful behavior. And this is what ends up creating lasting change for people who utilize dialectical behavioral therapy. And so interpersonal effectiveness investigates skills that people use to interact with each other. The way individuals react with one another influences the relationship. And this is what we're going to see in the Dear Man practice that we're going to introduce later, is it specifically targets interpersonal effectiveness and how to communicate well to get your needs met. And so this aspect of DBT encourages clients to learn communication skills and lay appropriate boundaries with people and to help build up their self-esteem. And these aspects create secure attachments and help build on vulnerability without to try and avoid that fear of abandonment that we talked about earlier. And so how is DBT tested? Leinen used trial and error approach with highly suicidal people in clinical research studies. And she did this while she was doing pursuing being a tenured professor at different universities and such. And so she had her research team watch behind a one-way mirror so they could see and observe her with a client, but they could not go and see the clinical research team. Trials were continually conducted until DBT was developed and used effectively with these clients. And eventually she published a book on skills training for mental health workers on treating people who have this disorder. This allowed for others to evaluate her techniques and challenge them through evidence-based practices. And it's a theory that is being used today because it was created way back in the 70s and 80s, but it's still being used today, and it's considered one of the only effective methods of treating people with borderline personality disorder. But it's used to help people across the board with different mental health challenges. I personally did it in trauma therapy and in OCD therapy as well. And it was my favorite theory. It definitely helped a lot more than some of the other ones that were being used for me personally. And it's predominantly still its use being to treat BPD. It also has been proven successful with people who have substance abuse challenges as well. So the further research into DBT, it has, like I mentioned, it has been used to treat trauma victims as well, to help them conceptualize what they have experienced. But in a specific study from the National Library of Medicine, it demonstrated that 18% of PTSD victims dropped out of treatment, so only that number. And those who responded well to the therapy remained in, and they responded very well. A pre-test and post-test was conducted following the therapy. Those who reported self-harm behavior from before the therapy dropped from 50 was at 52%, but that dropped down to 35% after the study had been concluded, demonstrating more success with helping with extreme emotional reactions and responses to feelings and crises. DBT, there are some controversies despite its amazing success, and it requires, and so these are just some of the cons with it, is it requires a significant time commitment in therapy. Traditional DBT models, which not every therapist does, but it requires weekly therapy as well as doing a weekly therapy group, and then a 24/7 access to a counselor at any time to help build on that. And so it can be a significant time commitment. Learning DBT skills can be overwhelming for people who aren't ready to commit to that level of change in their lives. And it often encourages the client to participate in regular homework. There are a lot of worksheets associated with DBT. And as you move through those 4 modules, there are worksheets and practices that are given every time. And so if you're doing weekly therapy and a weekly skills group, and then doing homework, it's almost like a lot of time in your week is being dedicated to mental health. And in DBT, despite its being successful with trauma patients, there's no formal processing of trauma, which can be essential sometimes to the trauma recovery process. And so here is our Dear Man example video. And it shows us why the Dear Man approach is helpful in working with people who may not always be able to have full control of their emotions.
Dear Man is an interpersonal skill set used when you'd like to ask someone for something in a way that will more likely get them to say yes. It's based on assertiveness training models and can be extremely effective depending on several factors. You may find as you listen that assertiveness like this doesn't fit with what you've learned from your family or your culture. That's okay. See if there's anything within this skill that could still work for you. The term Dear Man is a way to remember each skill: describe, express, assert, reinforce, stay mindful, appear confident, and negotiate. First, describe the current situation using just the facts. For example, you told me you would do the dishes last night, but this morning when I came downstairs, the dirty dishes were still there. This helps orient the person to exactly what you're reacting to. You might be tempted to say more like, "You're always annoying with this stuff." Don't do this. Keep your describe short, concise, and objective in order to grab the person's attention and avoid making them feel defensive. Next, express clearly how you feel or your opinion about the situation. Don't assume the person knows how you feel. For example, I felt disappointed when I saw the dishes weren't done. By sharing your personal reaction, you're helping the person understand why you're making the request. Next, assert your request by clearly asking for what you want. Don't assume the other person knows what you want. Be clear, concise, and specific. For example, "Can you please do the dishes now?" Or, "If you know you're not going to get to the dishes, can you tell me so that I can do them and we can have a clean sink in the morning?" Notice how each assert was a question. It's not enough to simply express, "I'd like you to do the dishes." It's also not effective to demand, "Do the dishes now." Asking an assertive question can be uncomfortable for people at first and may require a lot of practice. Finally, reinforce or reward the other person ahead of time by explaining what they could gain by giving you what you want. At a minimum, this can be expressing appreciation or gratitude, just by saying, "I'd really appreciate it." Or try being more specific to the situation. "Our living space would be cleaner, which would make me less stressed. I know I'm a lot easier to live with when I'm not so stressed." Now, the other person might interrupt you, argue with you, or try to change the subject. This is why it's important to use the skill of staying mindful of your goal in the situation. If needed, express your opinion or reassert your request again and again. It might feel silly or you might be tempted to change up your script. Instead, just repeat in a calm voice, "Can you please do the dishes now?" or I would still like you to do the dishes now. If the person responds with their own request, becomes mean, or tries to divert you, don't take the bait. Stay on topic and be mindful of your request. It also helps to appear confident with your voice and body posture. Convey that you know what you want and you're deserving of it too, while still respecting the other person. Don't whisper, stammer, or look down. Instead, speak up and stand tall. The skill is called appear confident, not be confident for a reason. Fake it until you make it. Finally, negotiate if you need to. Be willing to give in order to get. This may involve reducing your request or offering another solution to the problem. For example, how about I unload the dishwasher first so you can empty the sink? Another way to negotiate is to turn the tables and ask the other person for solutions. What do you think we should do? I would like a clean sink in the morning and you really seem to not want to do the dishes at night. How can we solve this problem? Dear man can also be used to say no to a request. Using the same steps, say no clearly. If someone asked you to hang out and you wanted to say no, a dear man response could look like this. Hey, I'm feeling pretty drained and tired. I can't hang out today. I'd be more fun on a different day when I have more energy. Can we hang out one day next week instead? Notice how describe wasn't necessary since the person already knew what you were reacting to. Notice how you asserted clearly, I can't hang out today, instead of saying something unclear like, I don't think I can today, or I'm not sure. Dear man is a skill that works best when practiced. Practice writing your dear man out ahead of time and rehearse in front of a mirror or another person. Describe, express, assert, reinforce, stay mindful, appear confident, and negotiate when necessary.
So we've just watched that video and it gave you a little insight about what Dear Man looks like. So as you can see, the Dear Man is an acronym. So it's describe, express, assert, reinforce, stay mindful, appear confident, and then negotiate. And so what this is it's trying to help the client express their needs, what they need and what they want in a respectful way to the other person. So using Dear Man will increase the likelihood of possible outcomes from your interactions. So a little bit about this, it is one of the techniques and tools that DBT offers. And I suggest we'll have a link to the paperwork for it at the end. I suggest as the therapist that you look it over and even do it with yourself. This is something that really just is to help you state your needs. And so anybody can do it. So what you want to do is you want to describe the situation that happened. And then this is, you don't want elaboration, you just want the facts. This is what happened and these are the facts of the matter. And then express, how did that make you feel? What were the emotions that were going on while that situation was happening? And then you want to assert what to do. You want to give a voice to how you're feeling. So what do you want to do about this situation? Reinforce it. So then what does the other person get in return? So what's going on between you and that other person in this situation? Because it's not just your needs, but you want to be mindful of their needs as well, which leads us to mindfulness. So focus on that goal, that need that you want to get met. You want to appear confident. So talk about, the stance you're going to have, the voice that you're going to have, I'm going to be standing up, or I'm going to, use a clear tone, no shouting, because that tends to, people stop listening when shouting happens. So make sure that all of the different ways that you can project confidence are there, without projecting anything negative towards the other person. And then negotiate. The other person may not like what they're hearing, so they need some other options. Maybe they didn't think about, how that made you feel. Maybe, they just kind of said something off the cuff and they didn't realize that it was as bad as what you took it as. So you want to be able to negotiate, respect, and have them, pause before they say that again to you. So those are the steps, to get you through Dear Man while you're thinking about, the form. We can go to the example. So this is an example. If we go back to our case with Jerry, so teenage boy, in school, and he has all these emotions that he's feeling that he just doesn't know how to get across, in a way that is respectful and in a way that, doesn't make him feel even worse about himself. And so, this is just one example that could happen, so we're going to describe the situation. Jerry is in class and the teacher stops and turns and tells Jerry to sit down. So she's in front, he's at his desk and he's doing something and she just wants him to sit. So Jerry's going to express, I feel embarrassed when everyone's looking at me, all attention just went towards him. And so that's embarrassing, and so he wants to assert that to his teacher. So make sure that you use the exact language that you're going to use when you go to confront that person. So, Miss, whoever the teacher's name is, I get embarrassed when you call me out in front of the class. Let her know how that makes you feel. And then you want to reinforce that. I will try and have everything out on my desk, out of the backpack before class, so this doesn't happen again. And then go into mindfulness. So the goal Jerry has is so that the teacher can talk to him directly, not call him out in front of the class. So he wants to appear confident in what he's saying and not feel like he's whining or not feel like, he doesn't deserve this, and so he will stand up straight. He's going to keep eye contact. He won't get angry or shout. And then he negotiates. So maybe if you can walk over to my desk next time, if I'm making noise in class, you walk over to me and just say, sit still, instead of doing it from the front. And so that back and forth gives the teacher another option. It gives also the space to know maybe she doesn't realize that he's embarrassed. Maybe, she just was flustered and was trying to explain something, and his one motion, she just kind of saw it out of the corner of her eye or something. Like, it may not have been as big of a deal for her, but for him, it's a big thing. He's struggling with that emotional process. And so it just kind of compiles, I am not getting stuff done. The teacher's calling me out. The kids are now teasing me. It's that pile on of emotions that Tessa was talking about, that it really it brings the whole day down. It brings your whole attitude down. And it really just starts making you doubt yourself, doubt, how people should treat you. And it's just that pile on. And so Dear Man is just a way to just express yourself and know that what you're feeling is valid and that other people can be a part of that validation. So I suggest even for you to do it on your own about a situation that, I'm sure everybody's been in one of those situations where you feel like not as emotionally comfortable with the outcome as you thought you would be. And so just kind of go through this to see how it works. And you'll see that it really does make a difference. It's something that's hard maybe to express yourself, but once you do it a few times, it really does change the way that you interact with people. So, in conclusion, when working with someone who may have borderline personality disorder, you have to know what to look for because, like we said, there are a lot of red flags, but there are also a lot of similarities with other disorders. So making sure that BPD has been diagnosed and it is the correct diagnosis before moving forward. So when suggesting to your client dialectical behavioral therapy, you also keep in mind that it will take time. It will not only be time with you and the client, but it'll take time for the client to maybe see results. It'll take time for them out of their day. It'll be emotionally time consuming at points. So they have to be ready and willing to make those changes before DBT may be the best fit. That doesn't mean that some of these tools aren't good, even for if they aren't ready. It's a good starting point, but to get really into it and to get really set, like Tess was saying, that there's a lot of one-on-one, there's group, there's homework sometimes even. So you can definitely start it, but let your client know this isn't going to be, we're going to have this session and then everything is going to be done. You're going to know everything. Like there's a lot of back and forth. So DBT may not be the right approach for you or your client, but there are many tools that you can try to see if maybe some of those tools will fit better with a different approach and just combining the two. The Dear Man approach is just one, like we mentioned, and it really helps just regulate and validate where we're coming from and how we, see a situation and how we feel after the fact. So in the end, these tools and your guidance as a therapist with the client should be able to better identify the emotions they're feeling and also work through the best ways to vocalize those emotions so that they can then go through their day and remember these things so that, it'll slowly become just something that they do. It's not like, oh, I have to go home and fill out the sheet. It's, no, I already know what to do next in this situation during the actual situation. That's the goal here. So hopefully this is a new tool that maybe a new theory that you can look at and take back to your clients.
All right. And here are our references. So thank you everybody for watching. We appreciate it. And go ahead and check out some of our other materials to learn more about this amazing process. Bye, everybody.